Today we're going to talk about simple epithelial tissues. This is going to be one of several types of tissues that we talk about in this unit. And the goal of this video is to help you understand the structure, classification, and functions of simple epithelial tissues in the body. So first, what is the function of epithelial tissues in general? So epithelial tissues Epithelial tissue is the lining tissue that forms the boundary between our organs and the external environment. So in this picture, you can see the internal walls of the respiratory tract. And those are those walls that form the boundary between the organs in this case and what's external to them. That boundary is lined with epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue has a few functions, and these would include protection. So that lining helps to protect. It also helps absorption, filtration, so filtering out the bad stuff, getting rid of that and letting in the good stuff, and also secretion, so what is produced, what comes out of that tissue. So those are the main functions. Now we'll talk about what structures epithelial tissues share. So the top surface of an epithelial tissue is called the free surface or apical surface. The bottom, and there's going to be a picture, some arrows that pop up in just a moment that shows these, but I'm just describing them first. The bottom surface is called the basal surface. And then there's a membrane that's underneath the basal surface, and it's called the basement membrane. So here, so each little cube that you see would be one cell. You're putting a bunch of cells together, and that forms a tissue. The top layer is called the free surface. Then the bottom of each of that bottom layer of the cubes is called the basal surface. And then underneath the basal surface, you have the basement membrane. That's this dark pink area. And all of these tissues, all of epithelial tissues, are avascular, meaning there's no blood vessels in them. There are no blood vessels inside these cells. They don't have any blood vessels at all. Okay. Now, epithelial tissues are going to be classified. Remember, one of my goals in this video is not only to go over the functions, which I went over last slide, and not only the structures. I've gone over some of the structures here, and we'll talk about those a little bit more as well. But I also want to help you classify epithelial tissues. There are going to be three types of simple epithelial tissues, and they get classified by the number of layers. So that's very important. They get classified by the number of layers and the shape of their cells. Those are the two criteria that you're looking at. How many layers does the epithelial tissue have, and what's the shape of it? If you can answer those two questions, then you can classify it. So let's talk about the number of layers first. And this is going to be the distinction between simple and stratified epithelial tissue. So simple epithelial tissue has only one layer of cells. That's it. But stratified epithelial tissue will have more than one layer of cells. So that's the first distinction that will get made between simple and stratified epithelial tissue. And that's based on the number of layers of cells. In this video, all we're talking about right now is simple epithelial tissue. In the next video, we'll talk about stratified. Okay, so of simple epithelial tissue, there are going to be three types. The first one that you see in this image is simple squamous epithelium. Sometimes I've heard people say squamous. I say squamous. Simple squamous epithelium. And this is going to be a single layer of cells. That's what makes it simple. But now we're thinking about the shape of these cells. That's what's going to make the difference in the 3 types of simple epithelial tissue. The shape here of these cells is they're flat. It's a single flat layer of cells that's thin and permeable. And the function is going to be rapid diffusion of materials. And just think about this. If this layer is very thin, because it's so flat, the structure is so flat, it makes it very thin. It's very easy for molecules to diffuse or just cross through this layer if it's very thin. And that's what allows that diffusion, that crossing, to happen so rapidly. If the cells were thick, then that diffusion process would take longer. Okay, so the structure actually helps the function in this case. And where would simple squamous epithelium be found? It's found in blood vessels and lung tissue. And think about that for a second. What the connection between blood vessels and lung tissue. So when you breathe in, oxygen enters your lungs, but that oxygen is going to cross through the simple squamous epithelium very rapidly because the simple squamous epithelium's so thin and flat. That oxygen is going to cross through very rapidly and enter into your blood vessels. And then that blood carries the oxygen throughout the rest of the body. So this is simple squamous epithelium. All right, next is simple cuboidal epithelium. So this is a second type of simple epithelium tissue. And the reason it's called cuboidal is because it's shaped like a cube. This is also, because it's simple epithelium, it's still a single layer of cells, just one layer. But these cells have a different shape. They have a cube shape. The function of these cells is secretion and absorption of substances. So they secrete, they give off substances, and they can also absorb or take in substances. And simple cuboidal epithelium are going to be found in the tissues of your kidneys. Your kidneys play an important role in filtration. So this ability of these cells to give off certain substances and absorb certain substances, that's going to be part of the filtration process. Okay, then you have a third type of simple epithelium tissue, and this one is called simple columnar epithelium. It's called columnar because it's shaped like a column. Think of a column that holds up a building. So it is also a single layer of cells, and that's why we call it simple epithelium. But in this case, the shape of the cells is different. These cells are very tall. That's what gives them their columnar name. And these cells are very closely packed together. Now, at the top here, you may notice something different. This little brown section, those would be cilia or goblet cells, and the function of those types of cells at the top is they secrete mucus, that slimy, slippery type substance. And the function there is when these cells secrete mucus, that mucus actually helps protect the cells. So if something rubs up against these cells, the mucus provides that kind of protective layer for them. And these cells are also aiding in the absorption of substances as well. So these types of cells, simple columnar epithelium, this type of tissue, I should say. So the tissues are made out of these column-shaped cells, but when you put all these cells together, you get the tissue. And this type of tissue, simple columnar epithelium, is going to be found in the lining of your digestive tract. So think about this. Why would that be beneficial for these types of cells to line the digestive tract? Well, when you consume food, that food is not always very soft. It can scrape up against the lining of your digestive tract. But if there's a mucus layer that's lining the entire digestive tract, then even if the food itself is maybe jagged or a little sharp, very hard, something like that, then it's not going to end up damaging the lining because there's that protective layer of mucus that helps it kind of slide and move along. Okay, so I hope you're getting the idea of how it is that the structure of these cells and what it is that the structure of these tissues and the function that they have actually aids in various functions in the bigger picture. Okay, so I've drawn an arrow here to the cilia. Again, they kind of look like little hairs at the top, and those are going to secrete mucus and help protect those that the tissue that underlies it. So to sum up, epithelial tissue is the lining that protects the body from the external environment. All epithelial tissues have a free surface, a basal surface, and a basement membrane. Simple epithelial tissues are made of one layer of cells. That's what makes them simple. And they can vary in shape. The three shapes that we looked at, I didn't write this, but the three shapes that we looked at were squamous, those were the flat ones, cuboidal, those were the cube-shaped ones, and columnar, they were the tall, thin ones.